Welcome to episode 2 of the Cannabis Corner. We had a lot of big news this week, so let's jump right into it. All right, so I need to start this video out with the news that everyone has been talking about this past week, in that certain compounds found in cannabis may be able to prevent infection from coronavirus. Now, this specific study that everyone is talking about is from Oregon State University, and basically they studied CBGA and CBDA, so the raw forms of those cannabinoids, and they showed signs of being able to prevent infection from COVID into human cells. Now, this was done in a petri dish. There's a lot of studies and research that still need to be done for this to be any viable source of, real prevention of coronavirus, but it's very promising. And so this isn't even the first study that has shown signs of certain cannabinoids being able to add another layer of protection against coronavirus. All of this essentially just, in my opinion, highlights the fact that cannabis should not be a Schedule I drug, which is reserved for substances with no medicinal benefit. It's clear that there are medicinal benefits to cannabis, and I'm hoping that a lot of money gets thrown at this to actually see if this is something that would be replicated in human trials as well. So this next segment is exciting because it's the first in the agricultural industry. There's a farm in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania, that is feeding their chickens a partial diet of hemp seed. So in the agricultural industry, anything that you're going to feed animals that we are then consuming a byproduct of, there's a lot of red tape to getting that animal feed approved. So this farm is the first one that's gone through that entire process to get their animal feed that has 20% hemp seed approved. Lancaster County is a county that's very rich in hemp history, dating back all the way to the colonial times, so it's cool to see this happen in Lancaster. I'm not sure where the hemp seed is from. It would be awesome if they grew it in the county as well. I'm not sure. But what they're saying is, I'll scroll down here, they're saying that the vitamins and nutrients are much higher in these eggs than compared to eggs from chickens that were not fed hemp seed. So we'll scroll down here. They're saying there's 3 times the omega-3s, a third more lutein, 4 times more vitamin D, 2 times more vitamin B12, and 6 grams of protein. So if you're in Pennsylvania, try to get your hands on some of these eggs and let me know what you think of them. For this third segment, we have news of some genetically modified hemp seeds. So this is the world's first 0% THC hemp cultivar. It was produced from Trilogene Elite Hemp Genetics. And the reason this is important is because the Farm Bill of 2018 essentially created 2 different types of cannabis. They said if it has less than 0.3% THC, it's industrial hemp, and it's not a controlled substance. If it has more than 0.3% THC, it is a controlled substance in the eyes of the government. And so in 2020, almost 10% of the 70,000 acres that were cultivated for hemp tested hot. So a few weeks before harvest, they tested over 0.3% THC. The entire crop had to be destroyed. So we're punishing farmers. Repeat offenses can even bring criminal charges against the farmers. So we'll see if this takes off. Apparently, they're going to be available as clones this year and then seeds next year. We'll see what the farmers think. Regardless, if you want to support the hemp industry, I would recommend checking out this petition from Vote Hemp. Just Google Vote Hemp 1%. It'll bring you to this link. And it's essentially just a petition to change the definition of hemp to a 1% THC limit, which would eliminate a big portion of those hot tests and basically would just help the farmers out. I'll put this link in the description of the video as well. For this fourth segment here, we're going to be going down a little bit of a rabbit hole. This poll funded by cannabis prohibitionist group SAM, Smart Approaches to Marijuana, show big support for legalization policies, despite the way that they're painting this in the media. So they asked people to choose one of the 4 options. They said, do you support recreational legalization, medical, decriminalization, or prohibition? 38% voted for or chose recreational legalization. So they say, when they're presenting this data, 38% support full legalization, 62% support other non-legalization policies. Well, that's not true, because I would consider medical legalization as part of the legalization effort. But they're presenting this to the government. So they're saying, hey, 62% of voters oppose recreational cannabis, which is just not true. It's just the way that they're presenting the data. And anytime numbers and data is being presented, it can be presented in a way that, enforces what they're trying to get everyone to think. So it's just important to take a deeper look into any company that's presenting any information to understand what their motives potentially may be. So I did a little bit of extra digging into this group, SAM, and found this. It didn't take long to find this article. A maker of deadly painkillers is bankrolling the opposition to legal cannabis in Arizona. Insys Therapeutics. So Insys had a synthetic THC drug that was approved by the FDA to treat nausea. So if they're making synthetic cannabinoids, obviously they don't want the real thing to be legalized. Insys donated $500,000 to the fight to not allow recreational cannabis in Arizona. They were not successful. Cannabis is legal in Arizona at this point. This is from 2016. But Insys also has synthetic opioid drugs. So it's like, these are the groups that are funding the anti-cannabis rhetoric in the media. And then you just go another step further, like, oh, what's up with Insys Therapeutics now? Well, they're bankrupt because of criminal allegations tied to its addictive opioid painkiller. I'm pretty sure this guy, the president, is still in jail. So like, just important to, try to take a look behind the curtain anytime you're consuming information anywhere nowadays. You never know what people's true motives are. For the fifth segment here, we have news of Virginia lawmakers still at odds over resentencing for people in prison on cannabis charges. So apparently there are 10 people in the state of Virginia in prison where the charges that were brought against them were only for cannabis. Then I think a lot of them were bringing cannabis into the state. And so Virginia voted for adult use cannabis. Originally, they were saying, this will start in 2024. They all want to start it as fast as possible. They're trying to get it started in 2023 now. And so there's two different sides here. One side is saying, hey, even under these new laws, bringing 5-10 pounds into the state, it's still a felony, regardless of, adult use legalization. Doing that is still a felony. And then on the other side, they're saying, hey, I just went to go visit this medical operator. They have thousands of pounds. And that seems okay. So why are people sitting in jail for bringing, 5-10 pounds into the state? There's like 560 people, I believe, that are in jail in Virginia, and part of their charges were cannabis related. So apparently they're going to allow them to petition for resentencing. So apparently they all agree on allowing the 560 people to petition for resentencing, but they're not sure how to handle the 10 people who are in jail or in prison solely on cannabis charges. Virginia, the state of Virginia, there's like one non-multi-state operator. So Virginia does not seem like it's going to be a very equitable state for small businesses and people who have historically been, disproportionately impacted from the war on drugs. This is not looking like it's trending in a good direction either, because Republican lawmakers are trying to pass legislation that would gut their social equity provisions that were added. So if we go here, they basically are saying they want to introduce this new legislation that reallocates revenues from the state cannabis tax so that the 30% currently allocated to the Cannabis Equity Reinvestment Fund would be reallocated to the general fund. And what that is, I'm not really sure, but just any time where state politicians are trying to pull back social equity aspects of their cannabis law, I think it's crazy. I really hope that doesn't happen in Virginia. We'll see what happens over the next year or two, but it's not looking good so far. For segment number 6 here, we have the South Dakota governor wanting cannabis activists to pay the legal bill for her lawsuit that blocked legalization. So in 2020, the people of South Dakota voted to pass medical and adult use cannabis. For some reason, medical and adult use were both on the same ballot initiative, which is unconstitutional in South Dakota. They were supposed to be two separate questions. So the governor, who's anti-cannabis, starts a lawsuit, and the Supreme Court in South Dakota repeals legalization because it was in fact unconstitutional. How these activists, the people who wrote this ballot initiative, didn't know that that was unconstitutional in South Dakota, that it had to be two separate questions, I don't know how that happened. But now the governor is saying, hey, this tax bill is $140 million. We don't want the people of South Dakota, the taxpayers, to pay that. So she's trying to get the cannabis activists to foot the bill. I'm not sure how people didn't realize that this had to be two separate questions. But at the same time, I don't understand why the governor, Kristi Noem, is like, oh, okay, the people of my state want cannabis legalization, but there's this little loophole that they didn't follow, so I'm going to repeal it. It just doesn't make sense to me. It'll be funny to see how this shakes out. Kristi Noem, the governor, is up for re-election this year. So if you are in favor of cannabis and you live in South Dakota, do not vote for Kristi Noem. The seventh segment here, I just wanted to follow up. Last week I talked about Delta 8 and some of the confusion. So this week we have news out of Kansas that the state attorney general said Delta 8 THC is a controlled substance. It's not allowed to be sold in Kansas. When a couple weeks ago the FDA said, or the DEA said, Delta 8 is not a controlled substance. So there's a lot of confusion around this. I don't see this getting any clear in the near future. I think a lot of states are going to do something like this where they're going to prohibit it in their state until the federal government figures out how they're going to regulate this. But I think this is going to get more complicated before it gets resolved in 2022. For this eighth segment, I want to talk a little bit about the illicit cannabis market that is very much thriving in the United States. So some of the best climate in the world to grow cannabis outdoors is Southern Oregon and Northern California. Due to demand across the country for cannabis, because a lot of states have no adult use regulations, international crime syndicates are setting up shop in Southern Oregon and Northern California, growing cannabis, distributing it all across the country. This is nothing new, but there's just been some articles this week, so I wanted to highlight this. These people are coming in from all over the country, all over the world. So they're Russia, China, from Mexico, Argentina, so many different countries are named in these articles. And they're setting up shop, polluting the land, polluting the streams, intimidating neighbors. And so these communities that have historically, wanted the freedom to cultivate cannabis on their own and not be persecuted by the law are now looking to law enforcement to say, hey, you guys need to crack down on this. I don't think this gets resolved until there's legal cannabis that's affordable, available in every single state across the country. Until then, there's going to be demand on the black market. So this article on The Guardian highlights Southern Oregon. This one on Politico is talking about Southern Oregon as well, and has some pictures of just some of the pollution that these people are leaving behind with no regard for the land, obviously. And this article is about California. So a similar thing is happening in Northern California, but it's a little bit different dynamic because of the structure of the industry in California. In Oregon, most of the residents in Oregon purchase cannabis from legal dispensaries. In California, that's not necessarily the case. The tax structure and fee structure to become a licensed operator in California is crazy. It's super expensive, and it is difficult for small operators to stay afloat with all of those fees. There's another problem in California where, again, this comes down to law enforcement, but you can go to California, Google search cannabis dispensary near me, find a result, go to the store, purchase product, and leave, consume your product. You didn't even know that you were just in an unlicensed dispensary. So there's like physical retail locations that are not licensed in California that are taking revenue from the regulated market. So apparently Gavin Newsom is saying that he wants to look at the tax policy to stabilize the market. We'll see what he actually ends up doing. But until there is federal reform here, and cannabis, like I said, is available in every state, there's going to be an illicit market. And with that comes all of these types of things. The second to last segment here is about brain scans and how they could help police detect cannabis impairment in drivers. So obviously with alcohol, breathalyzers are very reliable, and they gauge the impairment level of someone who has a specific blood oxygen level. So cannabis is very different because on one end, everyone's tolerance is very different, and THC stays in your system for a long time. So just because I have THC in my system doesn't mean that I'm currently intoxicated or impaired in any way when it comes to driving. And so there is a study that's going on where apparently they're seeing a correlation between an increased oxygenated hemoglobin concentration and impairment level. So they gave this group of people, some a placebo, some cannabis, and although the same dose was given to all volunteers, there was a wide range of impairment measured by the researchers, from very mild intoxication to obvious impairment, underscoring the unreliableness of using THC in the blood or oral fluid to identify impairment. So obviously we're not going to be doing roadside brain scans, but it's going to be interesting to see how this technology develops and where this research goes, to see what might get rolled out on a federal level to law enforcement all across the country to determine impairment from cannabis. And so to round out this episode here, sticking on the topic of impairment, I just wanted to highlight this article that the New York Times put out in talking about how more young kids are getting sick from cannabis edibles. So there's evidence that's showing as edibles are legalized in any given market, whether it's Canada or the United States, there is an uptick in ER visits for accidental cannabis consumption from children. In the illicit market, edibles are made to replicate Sour Patch Kids or gummy worms or all these things, and the packaging looks very similar. All of that's not allowed in the regulated market, obviously, because it would confuse kids. But a lot of people still get cannabis from the illicit market. So I just wanted to put this out there to say that you need to be very responsible. If you're going to buy edibles, even if you don't have kids, just your pets. Like, your pets will get into stuff. Like, I know a story of someone in my family who had their edibles in a cabinet and their dog opened it and ate like 400 milligrams worth of edibles. They thought it was safe in a cabinet. No. Make sure that you're being overly cautious when you have edibles, especially if you have kids in the house. A lot of these things taste good. They're gummies. Kids are going to eat 10 of them if they get access to it. Like, this is very dangerous. We don't want kids consuming cannabis or pets consuming cannabis in a high dose. Just be responsible with your edibles. That wraps up the second episode of the Cannabis Corner. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you learned something. If you did, please like and subscribe to the channel. It'll really help me out. Share the video with someone you might think would enjoy the content as well. And any feedback, please let me know in the comments. I'm looking to constantly improve and engage with the community who is consuming this content. All right, until next week.